Okay, thank you, Riffy, and welcome everybody. It's good to see you all again. My name is Eddie, and we're going through this Discovering Buddhism module called Mind and Its Potential. So let's begin as we normally do by doing a short breathing meditation, setting our motivation, and saying a few prayers together. So please make yourself comfortable in your seat. Make sure that your back is straight, your shoulders are relaxed. You can close your eyes partially. And breathing normally and naturally, become aware of the movements that take place anywhere in the body. Then imagine that all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions are in the space above the crown of your head. And that all sentient beings, which include your parents, your family, strangers and difficult people, are surround you. You recollect what you have in common with all the people who surround you. If you're just the same as everybody else, in that you wish to avoid suffering, you wish to be happy, and at present, your happiness is not stable. Nevertheless, we're all equal in that causes of our suffering can be abandoned, and the potential for authentic happiness, stable happiness, abides within each one of us. That being the case, decide to help others to be as happy as they possibly can be, and to protect others from the suffering that they wish to avoid. I think the way that you're going to do this is to lead all beings in an authentic path to protect themselves from those forms of suffering and deliver them into the highest forms of happiness. And we'll acknowledge that aspiration of ours by reciting the refuge and generation of bodhicitta prayer together. So let's recite this together. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Now, to stabilize and increase this wish of ours, we'll recite the 4 immeasurables prayer together. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Now, to accomplish enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, we need to abandon aspects of our thinking, speech, and behavior, and develop all the good qualities that are possible. We need to accumulate a great deal of merit to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of others. And this is all summed up in a prayer called the 7 limbs. So let's recite that together. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now, one of the most essential aspects of this wish to achieve enlightenment is the abandonment of clinging to our own body, our own mind, and our own ideas. So the essence of this mandala is to let go of the clinging to the objects. And in that letting go, we find ourselves free to bring about the welfare of ourselves and others. And so think that in the letting go and in the freedom, this takes the form of a great pure land where all living beings can abide and take the teachings of the Buddha. So the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniriyatayami. So we've let go, and the offering has been accepted by the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and they smile at us in delight. That vast field of merit, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas begin to dissolve into light that melts into the central figure of Shakyamuni Buddha. The emanation leaves his heart, moves through space, and comes to abide above the crown of your head. This emanation descends down through space, entering the crown of your head and coming to rest at the level of your heart, where the light begins to expand, filling your chest and all the limbs of your body. The light presses up against the pores of your skin and goes through them and starts to fill up the 10 directions of space. And wherever there are living beings within that space, they are touched by that light and transformed into figures of enlightenment. So these sort of solid lines we've drawn between ourselves and others, between inner and outer, us and them, good and bad, all those things have been realized to be just conceptual designations. They don't truly exist. And in the absence of that, there's just this vast illuminated space, which is the mind itself. You breathe normally and naturally, relaxed in this vast emptiness. And from the 10 directions of space, this energetic light, the deepest nature of mind, it begins to withdraw back into your chest at the level of the heart. And it remains there as a sort of sense of warmth and light. You should acknowledge now that we have this potential to become fully awakened and bring about the welfare of others. And this is just the natural potential of the mind, the deepest and most subtle mind that we have. So once again, I just bring to mind, think that by listening to these teachings today, by engaging in the question and answers, we're trying to illuminate the nature of who we are and how we exist, and develop it to its fullest potential to bring about the welfare of ourselves and others by becoming enlightened. Okay, now start breathing in through your nostrils, exhaling through the mouth, and just allowing your presence to be brought back into the room and to find yourself in front of the computer monitor. So here we are again, and of course this is the last class in this unit, and it's sort of dedicated towards the different questions and answers we might have about the topic. So I think it was last week I mentioned to you that there were a couple of exams in the text that you've downloaded from our website. And so one of the examinations had about 30 or 34 questions in, and the other one had about 9 questions in there. And I was sort of encourage you to do the 9-question exam, and yet some of you have done the 34-question exam. So whichever one you've done, I congratulate you on that and thank you for doing the very best you can. And if you have any questions about this examination paper, now would be a good time to ask them. And if you have any other questions about what we've covered, let's also have a look at those things too. So what questions do you have for me? Would anybody like to write something and let me know what you'd like to ask? And I'll do my best to shed some light on it.
So, Eddie, I've drawn the attention to the chat, and we'll see if anyone's typing anything in there.
Okay.
You know, everybody, that if you don't have questions for Eddie, then Eddie will have questions for you. Okay, so Anne's got one, but it's just going to take her a couple of minutes to type. Oh my gosh.
So Miffy, you can hear me out there, can't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so one of the students, I call her Alison, so she said she sort of came late and it's been quite a confusing topic for her. So perhaps we could ask Alison just to take her time and just write some of the things that she found confusing down, and then I can try to answer them.
Okay, so here we have quite a few coming now. How excellent. Ganga Rai from Nepal says, "Good Lord, I missed the last session. What did I miss about the 34 questions or the 9 questions?" It's okay. It sounds worse than it is. Then Nicola, would you mind please explaining cognitive fusion again with regard to the delusions?
Okay, I'll do my best. So, first of all, so the delusion is taking part within our mind, isn't it? And the delusions are of a conceptual nature. And so oftentimes, in other words, we're thinking about things in a way that really sort of agitates the mind. Because that's, the nature of a delusion is to agitate the mind in some way. So if we took either anger or attachment, we have an object in the mind, and we're relating to it in a way where we, as people, and the reaction to the disturbing emotion seem to be one and the same thing. So it's like, when we say things like, I am angry. So I and anger seem to be one and the same thing. Or when we've, suppose we've met somebody new and we've fallen in love with them, and then there's this great feeling towards that other person, and it seems as if we are the feeling itself. And so this is what this term fusion is related to, Nicola. Now, this comes across particularly when people become depressed, for instance. We are the whole feeling of depressed. That's what it feels like, and we think we are that. So it's not that we. Actually, what we have is this. We have an uncomfortable feeling that we are calling depression, for instance, or an uncomfortable feeling that we call anger or desirous attachment. So there's always a person having the feeling. So they can't be the same thing. Just like a person who has a farm is not the farm. Right? And yet people behave as if they are, don't they? I watched a show the other day where there's a hurricane coming, and this woman would not leave her house. Right? So there's this whole sort of thing she identified so strongly with owning the house as being like part of her. So she sort of, in a way, fused her identity with a house and its possessions and so forth, and didn't want to lose them. So she was quite willing to stay.
Eddie, people also fuse themselves with their car.
Yeah, well, they do. As we know, sometimes when a car is damaged by someone else, they get very, very upset. It's like, you hurt me.
So Stephen's asking, is that kind of thing about conflating the I with the anger, rather than observing the anger as separate from the I?
Yeah, that's right. So we can either fuse or bring about some distance. So what Stephen has just explained is how you can bring distance. Yeah, like we say, just observe the anger. Just observe your desire. Just observe the feelings of being depressed. So you already have a sense of freedom there. You're not fused with it. You can't, otherwise you wouldn't be able to observe it. So you take a sort of a step back. But with fusion, you've taken a step forward and sort of fused with the feelings that you're experiencing.
So then do we say to ourselves, I'm feeling anger, but I'm not the anger?
Yeah, that's right. You could say something like that. I feel anger, or here is anger. This is attachment. This is anger. I'm feeling anger. I feel, what they often say, of course, in the Buddhist thing is just like, feeling is just like, there's just three sort of aspects to the feeling. There's just unpleasant, pleasant, and neutral. So, of course, when we have a disturbing emotions, those things bring about unpleasant feelings. So to get that sort of emotional distance, you could say, oh, this is anger. I feel anger. But if you say things like, I feel angry, even though linguistically there's difference there, isn't it? A gap. But many times that gap becomes less and less because of the fusion. So is that useful for you, Nicola?
Yes, it is. Also, then a question from Sue. In her notes, she had clarity and knowing can be both obscured. So can you elaborate on this, especially the clarity aspect, how that would be obscured?
Well, they can both be obscured because they're a single entity. You know, the clarity and the knowing are two aspects of one thing that we call mind. So in terms of the clarity being obscured, let me make an example. What it's sort of getting at, Sue, is that what is appearing in a sort of a mistaken way or in a wrong way. So, for instance, in the texts, right? So they give different examples, not so much to do with this, but we could use that example. Like if you really press your eyes hard, like in, and then open them, sometimes you can see two of the object when there's actually one. So two things are appearing rather than one. And then if you, in terms of the knowing of it, like if you can believe that there are actually two there, then you've got both obscured. Another example you could give is having blue sunglasses on and looking at a white snow mountain. And so the actual whiteness is being obscured by the blue lens. So the white snow now appears to be blue. But the knowing of it doesn't have to be obscured, does it? Because you can actually know, no, it's because I'm wearing these blue sunglasses.
So is it that we think then things aren't always what they appear to be?
Well, in this case, things are appearing. Yeah, this is a sort of really simple. The examples I've given here are quite simple. Right, so this is in terms of perception, of course. Now, if we go even deeper, like what Miffy's just said, right? So then you could even how the clarity of the mind could be obscured with relationship to how you exist. Right, so you might, like you say, you might think that there's a real self inside you. We have this idea of a self falsely appearing to exist either inherently or independently. So it appears that way. And for some people, they actually think it does exist that way. So then you have the both these factors of the mind, the clear and the knowing, both obscured. Which, like I said, if you grasp to it, if you hold on, if you cling to this idea that actually I exist in the way I appear to myself, you'd say, well, okay, the clear and knowing nature of the mind has been obscured in some way through a false idea. Other ways the clarity is obscured. For instance, when you get really angry, You know, people say, so I just saw red.
So then Sue's saying, so imprints give rise to appearances?
So one thing, so I don't know a great deal about imprints because there are so many different perspectives when you talk about imprints, right? So imprints is a real big thing from the mind-only perspective, and I'm not familiar with the mind-only perspective. And of course, they do talk about them also in from the middle way perspective. But also there, they have a number of different types. They talk about imprints in different ways. So what's the next thing you'd like to ask about imprints, Sue? Because I'm not very competent about that type of knowledge. So there are appearances. Certain imprints do arise from imprints. Yeah.
Sue hasn't kind of responded to that yet, but Stephen was asking, so would the clarity of our mind, say, be obscured by our attachment? Like you gave that example about the anger.
Yeah. That's true, Stephen. That's great. Yep. Actually, the main things that obscure the clarity are the disturbing emotions. And of course, then, you know, you've also got the imprints that those have left. So we have also the cognitive obscurations, where, you know, things appear to be inherently existent.
So then Anne asked, do the terms distortions, delusions, obstacles, poisons mean the same thing, or are they
also different? Referring to the same thing? They just use these different words to, what can you say, to heighten our understanding of it.
Is it a translator thing, do you think, or is it?
No, they're just there are just different ways to get us to sort of, you know, like if you say, you know, like we talk about poisons, you hear the word poison and you hear the word obscuration. You know, we get a different type of feeling just hearing those words, don't we?
Yep, we could probably add in plague in there as well. Contagion.
Yeah, so this is the idea. You know, this is not uncommon either. Where, like, for instance, they also do this. Who asked this question? Anne? Was it?
Anne, yes.
Yeah. So Anne, they also do the same type of thing when they talk about how the I exists. And all the terms just get the same meaning, but the terms are really useful. Like, you know, they say sometimes that the self doesn't exist from its own side. It doesn't naturally exist. And there's a couple of other things that they say too. So they use different words, and that's to help, because sometimes one set of words doesn't do anything for the person who's listening or reading. So they use another set of words. So it's the same similar type thing here. They talk about the three poisons, from the Pali, the three fires. Later on, obscurations, delusions, all these sorts of things. They're all going to get the same material, but they just use different words to sort of help us understand, or you know, the material. If we don't get it one way, maybe we'll get it another way.
Great, so that's very helpful. Then there's one other question then from Martin, that you touched briefly on the always present mental factors at one stage. Mm-hmm. Could you briefly explain the sequence?
No, Martin, I can't, because there isn't a there's parts within the sequence where they're not actually sequential. So it's like that sort of thing of you know, like a circle, and you've got the parts. Which part comes before the other part? So I have read material talking about these when they engage in the, the mind makes sort of contact with the what do you say, with the object. So sometimes the mental factors arise at the very same time. This is very much like the 12 links, right? So when you present them, you talk about each one of them, and it seems like they all follow one another. But actually, when you go a little bit deeper, they just can't. That's impossible. But when you talk about them or teach them, you teach them in a sequential model.
Okay, so Martin always wondered about that. So
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah. Well, I did too, Martin, and then I tried to do what you were doing, get a sequence going, and it just did my head in. Did you read up later? No, it's not like that. Actually, there's a number that arise together.
Also, Alison said about the various delusions and the poisons and everything, that she thinks probably part of her confusion came from that, of the different ways of saying the same thing. And when you knew it's so, overwhelming, all these different analogies or terms.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes, like when you use the, like for instance, when you use the word poison, it really shows you, like if you think, oh my God, you take a poison, the reaction that you would have when you take a poison. And that's what's sort of getting at this mind, a mind being really sort of unstable, reactive, bringing about great suffering and so forth. But then when you use the term like distortion, it's the same, they're still talking about the same mental factor or the same delusion. But here they're looking at it like what it actually does to the mind, or how the object now appears to the mind. So these terms are sort of they're all related to one another, but they're sort of looking at different aspects of the mind and its relationship to the object.
And also, Eddie, I remember in one of our classes of someone getting quite offended that they didn't have delusions because they come from like a social work or a psychology background, and to be deluded meant, like serious mental illness and being put into a mental hospital, and they were just very offended that they were told we all have delusions.
That's right. Yeah. Well, now looking at, it's lovely here, I'm just sort of thinking about like the term, like, anger, right? So anger is seen as a distorted mind, a delusion, an obstacle. It's also seen to be a poison. But then you can sort of look at, so I remember one of the things that His Holiness said about one of the worst things about anger in terms of it being an obstacle is that you can't reason. So it's an obstacle to reason. It's delusion. It's like a delusion in the sense that you're also not being able to get at the object properly. It's only appearing one way, which comes back to the mind being distorted. The mind is only seeing this object in a really negative light, when in fact there's more to it. And then in terms of the poison, it really, you are sort of poisoned, like it hurts, it's really uncomfortable and so forth. So perhaps that also might shed some light on these different terms and how they can all relate to one object.
Okay, so the questions have dried up now.
Okay, so I'll this topic, there's some things that I really would like you to all take away from it and to not forget. So one is this general definition of the mind being called clear and knowing, and to know what that the clarity is really talking about the nature or the sort of aspect of mind, and the other is talking about the mind's function. So the function of the mind is to know things, and in its nature is really talking about like the nature here. You can sort of look at it on sort of three different levels. What's common to all the Buddhist presentations is the nature being non-physical. So it's not a physical. It's not a physical entity. That's the most simplest way of saying it. It's not physical, and it's an entity that knows. Its function is to know things. Its nature is to not be of a physical nature. And if the question is like, why is that? Why is it not seen to be physical? Because from the West, the biggest presentation of mind is that it's produced by the brain, and the brain is a physical phenomenon. Yes, and they'll say, no, the mind comes from brain. But that doesn't make sense from a Buddhist perspective, especially from the point of causality. It's like physical phenomena produce physical entities and not mental entities. And the reason for that is that mind doesn't have the characteristics of a physical phenomena. So if you talk about like the brain, you go, okay, well, you can weigh the brain. I can look at a brain, I can see it. It's got color, it's got dimension. There's lots of things you can weigh it. You can use scientific instruments to say stuff about it. But you can't do any of that stuff with the mind. So this is why the Buddhists go, no, it's a different phenomena. It is not physical, it's impermanent like physical stuff is. So they share impermanence together, because they both change. But there's many other characteristics that it doesn't have. So we don't think that mind and body are the same stuff. And if you look at the causal process, especially from the point of view of substantial causes and contributory causes, it doesn't make sense to say that the mind is physical.
Eddie, there's also been, this has been a quandary of many people studying on the Western side of things, brains and the nature of consciousness, and coming up with a quandary, not so much talk about the mind, but say emotions, that emotions also are not physical. There's stuff happens in the brain, but the actual emotion of happiness or sadness, you can't weigh, you can't put in a box, you can't measure it in any way, and yet that's what they're talking about. So even just researchers get stuck straight away.
Now so when people hear this presentation, then they immediately go, okay, so they're different. You go, yep, they're different. Then the question is, so how do they relate to one another? Because the next thing follows, well, they're separate too from one another. They're different. Different and separate. And science and reasoning, you go, well, okay, if they're completely different from one another, how can they affect one another? And this quandary arises in the West because they're only looking at mind through the lens of just one thing, and that's the gross type of mind. Thinking, in other words, conceptions, like if you were saying about emotions, visual consciousness, that sort of stuff. Right? So they don't come up with the idea that mind might be more subtle than that. That is just the gross level of mind. And the Buddhists present subtleties of mind. So they've got two other levels, like a subtle level and a very subtle level of mind. And yet in Western science, they have no difficulties at all, propounding. Yeah, we have gross physical objects, subtle and very subtle. But they've not been able to sort of apply that sort of conceptual framework to the mind itself. So, from our perspective, from the Buddhist perspective, the way that they are related to one another is when you come right down to the most subtle level of mind. and there we talk about the subtle wind or subtle energy. The subtle wind energy of mind is where the relationship with the body and the more physical phenomena takes place. So they're not completely separate at all. From the level of gross mind and gross body, yes, it's really hard to see how, how come they're related, but they are related. We know this through experience. The body can affect the mind, and the mind can affect the body. But it's not known, with any sort of confidence from the Western perspective, because they don't have, everything's based on measurement, and we don't have anything to measure the mind other than the mind itself, to describe it and so forth and its functions.
So this is Nicola has a question kind of flowing on from this about then when we've been discussing Buddha nature, that which can transform into the body of a Buddha. Yeah. Can you please explain the bodies of a Buddha?
Okay, so probably not to your satisfaction, Nicola, but there are some very good books about this material. So it's not like it hasn't been talked about and explained. So there are a number of different types of bodies of a Buddha. Excuse me. And the term body doesn't, what can I say? It relates to a number of different types of phenomena. So one way of looking at the term body is a collection of something. Right? So that's one of the ways they use the term body in Buddhism, and in terms of the Buddha nature being the one of the transformative aspects needed to transform into the bodies of a Buddha. So in terms of the one body, of course, they call it the Dharmakaya. So it's called the body of the Dharma, because Kaya means body. And so that is really referring to the mind, to the enlightened mind. That's one thing. Then we come to what they call the Rupakaya, which are called the Rupa means form. So now we have form bodies. Now one of these bodies of form is a mental body. And they're called Sambhogakaya, the bodies of bliss. And then, of course, they have the Nirmanakaya, and these are the bodies that we can relate to on a sensorial level as sentient beings. Now, in the terms of the Nirmanakaya, so there's some that bodies that sentient beings can relate to, and there's others that you can't, unless you're really highly developed. So the one that you can sort of relate to is like, they appear as like human beings. Now, to work out how that all happens, that's all sort of explained within what they call highest yoga tantra teachings and so forth. And you try and put into place the causes now to develop those different bodies.
So Eddie, doesn't this tie into what you were saying too about how there's different levels of subtlety of physical form, and then from the Buddhist understanding the different levels of subtlety of mind?
Yeah. So then, like, this explanation is like saying a presentation of the subtleties of body within the Buddhist presentation. And that's really done at the highest Yoga Tantra level.
So that's just for the Rupakaya part, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of our practices now, you can sort of see we're putting into places the causes to develop a mental body. So like when you do like deity practices, like if you do like an emptiness meditation first, and then re-arise as the deity, that you're practicing, that's like a sort of a preliminary to having the actual Sambhogakaya. So, you're sort of getting familiar with what you would appear like, what you would appear to be. So, of course, most times when these questions are asked, it opens up a Pandora's box of questions. You just end up with more and more. And like I'm saying, to get good explanations on this, you really need to either have a highest tantric yoga initiation and then get the material in the books, and even better, have a teacher like Khyentse Rinpoche, Geshe Tashi Sering, or somebody who's actually spent time in those tantric colleges and are really familiar with the texts to talk to about it.
Well, Geshe Zopa.
Yeah, someone who's has the necessary qualifications in the study.
Nicole has said, yes, I think I'm getting just a bit ahead of myself. And I was thinking, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. Yeah. What makes it work, though, and where you can have sort of confidence in it, is the empty nature of the mind itself. That's what really makes it all work. If the mind was not empty of inherent existence, none of it would work. None of it would be possible. But because the mind does lack inherent existence, it is possible. And of course, here, the mind that I'm talking about is not this mind that we're using right now. That's not the mind that transforms into a Buddha body and all that sort of stuff. The mind that does that is the most subtle mind of all.
And so, Edie, then the Buddha nature part, so where does that fit in?
Well, we all have Buddha nature. Once again, you can have confidence in that because the mind is naturally empty and it also has the stains of the delusions upon it. And so that's the Buddha nature. Those stains can be removed because they're adventitious. They come about dependent upon, delusions and so forth. And delusions are also adventitious. They all arise from a mistaken mind, from a mistaken idea. So that could all be, so we can say, okay, so the mind, these obscurations and so forth, have never actually penetrated the deepest, the most subtle level of mind. So that's why it's possible to become fully enlightened.
Pauline's asking, do we access the subtle mind through meditation?
Yes. Yeah, so there are different presentations. So one from our perspective, from the Galupa presentation, the most subtle mind is accessed through the practices of highest yoga tantra. From the perspective of the Nyingma tradition, though, the subtle mind has always been present. It's always there. So they access it through. They also access it through the practices of highest yoga tantra, but they also access it through practices other than that. Really, just sort of by combining the practices of calm abiding and special insight placed upon the mind itself. So that's another way of doing it. Because this, like I said, this subtle energy is not something. It's just what we might say a deeper level of mind. But to access that deeper level of mind, you've actually got to sort of what do you say? Make this mind that we presently have a much more sharper mind, a much more effective mind. And that's done through, like I said, the practice of calm abiding and special insight.
Then Sue has a question about how we hear about the Buddhas sending out emanations. So what's an emanation? And because I would add in there, like, emanations seem to be kind of a matter of belief, isn't it? So how do we go about that without going all superstitious?
So when you hear the word emanation, Sue, what's appearing in your mind when you hear
it? Just giving you a moment.
Mm-hmm. So while Sue's thinking about this, what I found very useful here when you ask these sort of questions is what I try and do is relate it back to our present existence. Right? So when we talk about emanations and so forth, we're really talking in many ways of, is it like there's different bodies being emanated. So we go, well, what are those bodies? Well, they're mental bodies. And then, then we talk about different types of emanation, because then these mental bodies can also appear in the world as in terms of physical bodies.
Yeah, so Sue's written, she's not quite sure, but maybe like the, aspect of compassion Buddha.
Yeah.
A compassionate aspect of Buddha.
Being.
Well, she's not
so
quite.
You could say, so in that, oftentimes the text or the sadhanas is described as, the light rays themselves. And then you look at the light rays and you see they're made up of all these emanations of oneself as the Buddha. And these emanations are going out into the 10 directions of space and, blessing all sentient beings, meaning helping sentient beings to change their mind. So, but I'd also suggest that, even in everyday life, we emanate material. And it affects people. Like, for instance, when you become really angry towards somebody, aren't you sort of like emanating anger?
Yeah, and you can definitely tell when someone walks in and they're in a funk.
Yeah, that's right. You go, like, what's going on? So there's an effect produced, isn't
it? Alison says it drips off some people.
So that's like, you look at it, you go, well, anger's like, that's a mental factor. But it's having an effect on the outer world.
And Anne says it's so true. Also, a smile from ourselves generates smiles from others.
Mm. Yeah, so I often think, if we make it sort of bring it right back to where we are now and look at it, okay, so we can do this like in this world as we are, as ordinary sentient beings. But then when you do the sadhanas, we're not coming at it from the world of ordinary sentient beings, we're coming at it like from an enlightened aspect, so what are we emanating there? You go, well, compassion, because that's what enlightened beings do, don't they? We emanate all these virtuous mental qualities, and we give them types of forms. So the form might be here as another image of yourself as Avalokiteshvara, or if it were wisdom, Manjushri. So just as like if you're sitting in a room and you're really angry and you come in and somebody goes, whoa, right? But what have they actually seen? Well, they've just seen you, but they've been affected by that. So when you do these, like the emanations of light, or you emanate many different Buddha figures, it's a very similar type process, except here you're emanating compassion. So when you see, this is like when we look at a picture of Chenrezig or Manjushri, the thing that springs to mind immediately is, oh, that's compassion, or this is wisdom. Yeah, and that's one of the functions of these statues and pictures, is to remind us of the good qualities. So if we're sitting there really in a funk, and there's no good qualities coming off us, what the other person has thought of immediately is, oh, I'm getting out of here, right? They can see they're being affected by the funk that you're in. But within the Buddhist narrative of enlightenment and so forth, you're being affected by the good qualities that you are engaged with your mind or your senses.
And Eddie, when His Holiness gave the Chenrezig initiation online too, and then right at the end he said, you know, he's given this to the world, and it felt like everybody in the world was included, and it was like he was emanating his compassion all the way from Dharamsala to every single one of us, and you really felt that just the way he expressed it.
Mm. Yeah, and you know, for most of us sitting in front of our monitors and screens watching that, all of us would have felt something. You know, so it's a similar idea, isn't it? It's like, here we have this one person, His Holiness in Dharamsala, with one camera on him, but then all around the world there's, I don't know how many people watching, but each one of them being affected by that emanation, right?
Well, there were 10,000 online and probably groups.
And so for a lot of us, we would have had some sense of joy. Yeah, so in the text they talk about this too, where they talk about the Buddha or compassion being like a moon in the sky, the full moon, right? And wherever the light of the full moon lands on all these different bodies of water all over the world, right? So it's like that reflection is an emanation of the original thing.
And there can be limitless emanations.
Yeah, limitless. Yeah. Wherever
So
there's
Pete,
another mind, there's an opportunity for manifestation of an emanation.
So Peter's asking then, is like an image or a Buddha statue, you know, it generates a feeling of peace and calm. Is that an emanation too?
They are put forward as emanations, yes. You know, so, but once again, this is really dependent upon your view. Right? So for some people, just see it as a statue. But if you're a Buddhist practitioner, you sort of see it as one of the aspects of the Nirmanakaya, I think it is, or even Sambhogakaya. So yeah, you'll see in the text, you to see these statues not as statues, but as actual Buddhas. So you got to remember here, it's not Sambhogakaya or Dharmakaya or any of these things from its own side. It's always dependent.
Is that like when we have, say, a photo of a really close relative and we look at it and we relate to them as if they were there just by looking at the photo?
Yeah, in the same way. Yeah, and from a Buddhist perspective, this is really, what do you call it, when, suppose we have a picture of our guru or a deity, and we are somewhere and we look at it and something happens to us, some mind change takes place. Then we can call that a blessing. Right, so that's why they often give you little things like cords or little pictures of deities and stuff to carry around, because it's to remind you of the teacher and the teachings and the spiritual community. So when you engage with that object, either through seeing it or touching it or whatever you do with it, a mind change might take place, and then we call that a blessing.
So Pauline's asking, to be able to emanate joy at the time of death is important. Is this to help have a better rebirth?
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I should say you guys are asking good questions. You're a little bit further, a little bit more than what we've covered in the text, of course, but that's fine too.
Okay, here's a great big long one. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, from Anthea.
Yep.
A thought struck her last week about the habits of thought that we bring with us, or that she brings with her, and
Yeah.
influence her interpretation of the present situation. So I bring a level of alertness to my interactions with a particular person because they've behaved extremely badly in the past, for instance. So how do I learn from the past, with
Yep.
whilst trying to not, disregard all of those habits of mind that we bring along with us? Because people are, for instance, dangerous, but
Yeah.
how do we, let's see, practice equanimity, purify karmic habits without just kind of going into denial about the other people?
Yeah, that's right. So here, Anthony, I think at our level, probably the best sort of thing you could do is to start training yourself in equanimity. And I suggest this because it's one of the most, it's the foundation for every other good quality you'll try to develop later on. So we can, like you say here, we give this example, right? We suppose we've had interactions with a person and they have behaved extremely badly in the past to us and to others, and we consider them to be a dangerous person. So there's nothing wrong with that. But nevertheless, we go, okay, so how do I react to this dangerous person? How do I behave when I'm in their company, if I'm in their company? So we look at ourselves and see, is it a mind of aversion, fear, all these types of things. Then go, okay, this person is no different than me in that they're trying to avoid suffering. But in their attempts to avoid suffering, they actually hurt others. This person wishes to be happy just like me, and they're not happy just like me. This person, like I said before, has the ability to, just like me, is the same as me, to overcome all the forms of suffering they have, because suffering is not intrinsic to the mind. And they have the potential, what we call Buddha nature, or the empty nature of the obscured mind, to become fully awakened. Right? So that's all true. So that will sort of get your mind, and then you can sort of go, you can use that as a mind to develop affection for them, by either seeing them as a mother from a previous life and so forth. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean to say you become naive and place yourself in their company if you know this person, I've got all these good thoughts about them, they're all valid. I'm not just not making it up to try and feel good about them. This is valid. It's also true that they could still try and hurt you. Right? So until you build up a really strong sense of resourcefulness and fearlessness, I'd suggest you just avoid them. However, if you cannot avoid them, bring into your, the thing to go into is, okay, how can I help them? So, even though the Buddha was enlightened, his nephew, I think it was, or cousin, tried to kill him multiple times. There were, and the Buddha himself said, what is it? Something like this. It's not exactly the same, but it's a bit like it. He said, you try and help them, they hurt you. They make attempts to hurt you. You do nothing at all to them, they try and hurt you. So it means, in other words, whatever you try and do, this person is going to try and hurt you. So unenlightened people are like that. That's what they do. Not all of them, but some do. So if you look at it from the point of view of karma and think, oh, it's part of my karma that this person is trying to harm me from past lives and so forth. I don't know specifically why, but in general, this is the reason they give. You're going to go, okay, that's from from their side. You know, they've got this thing, they're looking at me as somebody who's harmed them in the past or the present, whatever, that's going to harm me. What I've got to do is not generate new negative karma, so the circle keeps on repeating itself, the cycle. So one thing you could do about that, like I said, is avoid them. Because if you're not there, they cannot create any more negative karma towards you. And it also protects you from behaving irrationally and dangerously.
So Eddie, is this a way of like getting underneath the behaviour? So we're not ignoring the behaviour that they're dangerous, for instance, but getting underneath all of that.
Yeah, we have. So then we have the two things, right? We've got these two views. We've got more than just the fact that they're trying to harm us. They are trying to harm us, but at the same time, we also know this person is trying to avoid suffering, but because they're not enlightened, unskillful, and so forth, they're actually creating more of it. We know that. Right? This person wants to be happy, but they don't know how to be happy. In their attempts to be happy, they're doing this. And that's, I'm the same. I do the same thing. Might not be as gross as this person, but I do similar type things. Not all the time, but sometimes. And that's because I'm unenlightened, just like this other person. But but nevertheless, we both have this potential to become enlightened, because the nature of the disturbing emotions is that they've never actually penetrated the mind. So you go, okay, bang, bang, that's all true. And just as I wish to avoid suffering, can I protect this person from suffering, just as I wish to be protected from it? Now, if your answer here is, you have this wish to do it, but if your answer is, actually, I can't. They're not willing to listen to me. They're really, their mind is very obscured. They seem intractable. Then, like I said, it's like if you do avoid them, but if you can't avoid them, when you're in their company, Anthea, understand that when they're upset with you and try to harm you, do anything like this, whatever you do from their side contributes to their belief that you should be harmed. So what did Corey say? It's like something like, I think, like I said before, when you're in the group, it takes 90 seconds to get out of this this disturbing emotion. Right? If you can wait 90 seconds, it'll be over. But you'll find that when people are angry and wish to harm you, there's no 90-second break. They just keep coming at you. And whatever you seem to do will enhance their view that you should be harmed.
Is that because they've lost all their reason?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't have the ability to reason here.
So some people are just unaware of their negative behaviour. Others actually intend to hurt because they're in the throes of their negative behaviour.
Right. And one of the simplest things you can do while you're in their company like Anthea is, even though you've done nothing other than appear in front of them, start saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And what you're sorry is for, you haven't actually, it's like, you might say, I'm sorry for just being here, and for you being, by being here, you're so upset. I'll just leave. Or, I'm really sorry, like they say, I've upset you. Even though once you haven't deliberately upset them, but just the fact that you're there. And then you can say, how can I help? Can you tell me what it is about me that makes you so upset so that I can do my best so it never happens again? So we're just sort of expressing more and more compassion towards the other and trying to be skillful, aren't we? But we actually know from our side, the real source of anger here is the other person's mind.
Edie, can you sit a bit closer to the microphone, please? Thanks.
We're saying here, we know from our studies and so forth and through experience that the substantial cause for the person's anger is in the other person's mind. You know, we are a condition for that to erupt, and we accept that. So you're sort of asking, okay, I'm really sorry, you know, for being a condition, for being here. What can I do so it doesn't happen again?
And then Peter had a related question about this then with equanimity. It's also hard not to have favourites. So instead of, you know, having the, you know, with the people being angry towards us then and trying not to retaliate in anger, but you can also have quite a lot of difficulty trying not to retaliate, respond with attachment or have favourites.
Okay, so now we have a different scenario. So let's say that we meet somebody new and we find ourselves attracted to them. So this is not an uncommon occurrence. So immediately, you know, like, so you want them, you find yourself attracted to them, and what you'll find, you also want to be with them. You'll want to possess them, have them near. So what you've got to do when that happens to you, you've got to look at it and go, oh, this is the actual mind of attachment. I'm seeing only good qualities here. There are no negative qualities here, only good qualities are appearing. Right, but there's no sentient being that exists with only good qualities. You know, I don't have all good qualities, neither does the other person. So we are the same there. And this person that I want to possess and to be happy is just like me, and I want to be happy too. And just like me, they are also suffering. And so now we sort of, you know, get a more holistic picture of the person, bring into the view here of that they are suffering. But they want to also be happy and are not authentically happy, that their happiness changes just like mine does. Right? So we need to be, once again, a state of equanimity towards the desirable. And, you know, we come down to the final thing. So what should I do? I need to protect this person from suffering, because I equally protect myself from suffering. I try and protect myself from suffering. Here I'm trying to possess this other person, have them really close to me as a means to protect myself from suffering. But you've got to go, I need to protect them from suffering as much as I protect myself. And equally, I need to actually provide them with the sources and the means, the abilities to be happy. And why? Because they're a sentient being just like me, and I want to be happy. So if you do that type of meditation, Peter, if you run that through your mind, you'll find yourself the attachment diminishes markedly. Right? You get this sense of equanimity again. And then what you can do on that basis is to have a look at some of the great texts like Arya Davis 400 and Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. So both of those texts have got excellent meditations against desirous attachment. But what you've got to do here is like, so you're looking at this through the lens of these two teachings, and believe me, your desirous attachment will diminish markedly in dependence upon what you're reading. But you don't want to get in and walk away with a sense of aversion towards them. You want to walk away with a sense of, my God, they're suffering. That's all suffering. I need to protect them from that.
So then, Eddie, what happens if you have a greater degree of, say, compassion towards the people that you like than the people that you don't like?
Yeah, so once again, you've got to bring in, you do the same thing again with equanimity. But here you can also bring in the equanimity of the 9 reasons. So you look at sentient beings you know, that it's irrational to actually have this type of
Favoritism
to the other. So that's also an equanimity meditation, but it's made up of these 9 points. So I don't think we covered that in this class, but it's been covered in other classes. And actually, the bodhicitta, in the bodhicitta module that we just finished, there's a whole section on this 9-point meditation. It's an equanimity meditation, but it's just done a bit differently, and that will we're going to say block this type of attachment.
Eddie, I remember His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying at one time that, he, of course, even he has, friends or people he doesn't get on with,
Yeah.
and that's like the current karmic manifestation, and also, the people that are your friends, you have a close karmic connection with, and probably a close karmic responsibility for, but that doesn't then discount the importance of everybody else. It's just kind of like the current situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you've got to check within yourself is how the mind behaves when you come into contact with these people. Because at present, with an undisciplined mind, the mind will become quite reactive. So when you meet people who have hurt you in the past, you'll immediately get an emotional response to it, and then aversion will arise. And with those who you have desirous attachment or lust towards, as soon as you see them or even think of them, you'll imagine all sorts of stuff. So that doesn't need to take place. You can use the equanimity to temper those types of reactions. But at the same time, you've still got to go it's true that I like this person more than another. But then you've got to go, okay, so all beings are equal. So you try and bring up your feelings towards strangers so that they are the same as the one that you feel drawn towards at present. So you've always got to remember that equanimity is just the staging ground. It has wonderful effects, of course, but it's just a preliminary to start developing affection. So it really does help to tamper aversion and attachment and these other types of negative mind. But it's to be used as a foundation for developing other states of mind, in particular, the sense of love and kindness or warmth towards others. Like for instance, once you have a sense of warmth towards the person who harms you and still feels very badly about you, you can now have the sense of warmth towards them by thinking, wow, it depends upon this person. I really have to practice my Dharma. I really need to be alert here and be patient with this person and acknowledge that they're really suffering here and try and help them as best I can. So, you have the warmth because, there's nobody else that does this to me. I've only got a couple of enemies, people we call enemies in my life. And if I didn't have them, I would not be able to I would not have to rely upon my practice of patience. I wouldn't be able to develop patience, in fact. I'd probably think I'm fine, everything's cool about me. So like I said, you've got to get, first of all, the equanimity to just not have that reactivity, then develop the warmth of love and kindness, of an affection towards others, and here you can be affectionate towards those people who are trying to harm us. So it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't mean put yourself in their reach so that they can actually harm you. It means no, when you're at home, bring this person to mind. Acknowledge their suffering. Ask yourself what you can do about it. And then be very rational about what you can presently do about it. So one thing is you can do is develop patience and depends upon this person. So
And not polarize people, because
That's right.
as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about, so how do I start feeling warmth towards white racists, for instance?
Yeah. Yep, that's right.
But going through that process that you said of not reacting and having recognizing that they're unhappy and that they need happiness, and then what can I do now? Well, at the very least is not retaliate and create more hate.
Yeah. So one of the things you'll notice with yourself is that when you come into contact with either very angry people or very beautiful people, is that your mind changes immediately. So now it's already gone. So you've already missed one type of thing you can do, right? So in other words, your equanimity has not been developed strongly enough because the mind has already reacted. So you've got to accept that and go, yep, that's exactly what my mind is. But sort of accept that it's done that and acknowledge that it's actually done that. So you can actually, now it's like your mind is not sort of fused with your emotions. It's like, oh, I've got a little step back here. I can actually see my mind has done this. Oh, that's a type of suffering now I'm experiencing. Yeah. So if you're familiar with giving and taking, you can immediately do giving and taking on that. It's like, oh, may all beings who come in contact with this beautiful woman or man and feel like this, may they be free of this suffering. May they be happy. If you come into contact with an aggressive person, the person that you feel fearful towards, of course you feel something. It's like, use it. I mean, you've got all the teachings of karma and so forth, but that's just telling you, look, this is why it's happened. You still have to respond in some way. So you can respond to being patient. Same sort of thing when you meet the desirable person, you respond with patience, you investigate. She looks so beautiful from her own side, but that's impossible. You bring to it wherever you're up to, whatever you're strong with in your own Dharma practice, bring it to it right there. It's not like you've lost the whole thing. You always get another chance with Buddha Dharma. Just because your mind has reacted in this particular way, remember your voice hasn't followed it and your body hasn't followed it yet, and you don't want them to. So bring into the next step whatever you can of what you recall of the Dharma. Actually, I read something the other day where it said, there are no good people, there are no bad people, there are just teachers. So if you're practicing guru devotion, you come across the attractive person or the person you have aversion towards, immediately, teaching. Here's my teacher. What's she teaching me? Here's the angry man, my teacher. What's he teaching me? This is just a manifestation of my teacher. So here you can say the manifestation, what we mean by that is the manifestation of your own mind. What's it teaching me here? So we, use the situations and bring them into the Dharma path.
So Gangarai says, so good or bad, we learn from it.
We can learn from it, that's right. I think it was Milarepa. So Milarepa never went to the colleges and had this massive education that we find the Geshis and we are trying to attempt and do and so forth. He said, nature myself is the teacher. So he didn't mean just the nature around him, which of course he also meant that, but he meant the nature of his own mind, how his mind responded to things, and then he was aware of that and how it affected him. And so, it was remember the story where Milarepa, where the demons appeared and they appeared to be external to him, so he tried doing all these different things to appease them. They appeared in his cave, and they were really distracting. So he thought I'd make offerings to them, I'd praise them and all these different things. And then he realized, hang on a minute, they're manifestations of my own mind. So this is the deepest teacher is the mind. But for us, for most, we need, that's the deepest, clear nature of mind, of course. And we have to have enough mindfulness to know that and call upon the teachings that are there to help us. Of course, this is not, we don't always do that. So then we need to, recollect what we remember from the books, or the idea that the guru is present, all sorts of different methods we can use.
So Pauline says, luckily we've got a human body to practice patience and how to develop compassion towards others. So thank you for your encouragement.
No, well, thank you, Pauline, and for everyone else who's here. Because without you, I would. I don't really have the encouragement to keep studying and doing these courses. So for me, it's wonderful that you're here and engaging in this type of study. Like I said, once again, without it, I would never be as focused as I am, as I presently am. It's so easy just to read books or just do it here and there, and then that's about it. But if you've got from week to week people who are depending upon you to present this material, then you've got to sort of up the game. So thank you. So I've got to up my game. It's great. And it's very enjoyable to do so.
So Eddie, we've got about 4 or 5 more minutes. So was there any other, you said the main thing that you wanted us to take away to remember about the mind. So was there any other last point?
So the things, like I said, the clear and knowing nature of mind, and the idea that the disturbing emotions, these delusions and so forth, aren't, what do you say, one with the mind. They're not intrinsic to the mind. But they're there, they arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. If we remove any of the causes or conditions, they're not there. So, for instance, one of the conditions to have a desirous mind is to have an object that you really like. So if that object is not there, you won't have a desirous mind. Our problem is we run into these desirable objects, so we put our senses upon them. Our senses go out, and then we draw the information back in, and we respond physically, mentally, so forth. That's one thing. So then you question that, and you go, "Oh, okay, this is what's going on. It really looks like that from my own side." So we apply analysis, in other words. But at other times, we're not there, and we start thinking about these desirable objects. Now, so then, of course, we get all the delusions and so forth, unless we apply Dharma wisdom to it. So in both instances, you need that object to appear before the delusion arises. Right? So that really shows you the sort of open, clear nature of mind, that they're not inherent to the mind. But so from that perspective, I think you can always walk around with a sense of joy that you're not absolutely crazy. That, you get crazy sometimes. Right? Like, why? Well, the conditions are necessary for the causes. And although I can't always pick the conditions and so forth, when they arise, I've got to sort of acknowledge it. And then we move the mind. We change the mind. We move the mind to some other object. So you should always know that you always have freedom with you. In actual fact, the way the Kagyu and the Nyingma presented is that you've always been enlightened and you just don't recognize it. But remember, that's a skillful means. But like I said, the mind that is distorted and so forth, these arise in dependence upon cause and conditions. Those cause and conditions aren't always there. They can be removed. So basically, we're good. We're okay. Even though we use these terms to say, like we're like junkies and so forth. That's also true, but junkies can come right. They can drop their habits. They can lead a life of good health and meaning in life, just like we can. And that's just because of this clear, nature of mind that doesn't possess these obstacles and disturbing emotions, and they're not intrinsic to the mind. If they were, we could never become Buddhas. We could never become enlightened. Buddha could not have become enlightened. Not because that obstacle's there. It's part of the mind. But it's not like that. And we can, so these two things about clarity and knowing, we can know this with that aspect of mind. You can know what hinders it. You can know what is required to abandon it. You can know what to do to develop a sharper, deeper, more concentrated mind. And then that clarity will become sharper, deeper, and so forth. So never give up. Like I said, everything is fine from the get-go. It's just for us to acknowledge that and work with it. So I think that's basically what I wanted to leave you with. A sense of I don't know, lost the word, but not to be
optimism.
yeah, be optimistic. Don't because it's reasonable to be optimistic. And yes, sometimes we get down. Try and recognize when you are, and immediately change it. Like if you're sitting down, stand up, go for a walk. There's all sorts of things you can do with your body that will change the mind. They're really simple things. And there's lots of things we can do with the mind itself to change the mind. So we've got two things on our side, a body and mind. If we just remember now, and this is what Dalai Lama says, disciplined about it. Remember, what I mean by discipline, remember and do it. I know we've come to the end of our class now. There are probably things that you found quite difficult, because this is one of the most difficult modules to go through, actually. When you, what did I say? Try and, whatever, as we go along through these modules, just whenever you do come to difficulties or things that aren't so clear, remember them, write them down, and just like we're doing here, bring them up in some other class if you wish to. Say, I know this doesn't have to do with this class, Eddie, but in the last class we talked about this, and I've been thinking about it, and this is what I'd like to ask you. So that's fine. So these modules should actually build on one another. So sometimes, just like me, the questions come quite a bit later, after the original material. So let's, time's up, folks. So let's dedicate. Thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in the Dharma, and for repaying the kindness of the teachers that we have, because that's all they ask of us, really. We don't need new socks and chocolates. So we really like you to engage in being better people by being kinder and wiser. So I want to dedicate our merit to, which is like a dream and exists in mere name, and not just this merit, but the merit of the past, the present, right now, and of the future, which has been created by ourselves and all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and all the other people we know, but it all exists in mere name, because it can't be found when searched for. This merit, may it provide us with enlightenment for the sake of all other living beings who exist in mere name, just like ourselves. So, see you next time.